Welcome, everybody, and thank you for giving us your time for today's thought leadership sharing session from Wazoku. And there's been a number of these over the last few months, and feedback from them has been great. So we keep them coming. And this time, I'm delighted to be joined by an old friend of Wazoku, Elvin Turner, who I hope many of you will know and has done amazing things for the whole world of innovation with his incredible book that he published. I don't know how long ago now, Elvin, some time ago, shot you into superstardom in the innovation world. Be Less Zombie, how great companies create dynamic innovation, fearless leadership, and passionate people. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's great. And it's one of the things that many innovation books are not. It is super accessible and easy to read and easy to follow and easy to action. So congrats, Elvin, on achieving what many have not with often overly academic textbooks on this topic. Just quickly before we delve into that, though, and let Elvin take the stage before we get into a discussion. For those of you that might not be familiar with the format of how we do these, I will quickly give a very brief introduction to Wazoku, and then Elvin will give a short presentation. He's going to share some thoughts on today's fascinating topic, which we've encapsulated in this sort of swipe right through innovation, and we'll start to explore the complex relationship that many organizations and many leaders have with this kind of broad topic of innovation. I've got my own strong feelings about this, and I'm excited to listen to Elvin's as we go. If you have questions, there is a panel that should be up on your screen that you can access that says, first of all, chat, second of all, questions. There will be no polls. And so where I would like you to pose your questions is unsurprisingly in the tab called questions. And I will be moderating after Elvin's session for any questions that there may be. If you like a specific question that's already come in and thought, oh, I was going to ask that, then vote it up because I'll probably pick the most popular ones first as we go through. Don't be shy in asking those questions as we go, and try and make them as difficult and as challenging as possible because we like those on a Thursday afternoon. For those of you that don't know Wazoku, we're a global software business, and our agile innovation management platform and open innovation marketplace supports global organizations in changing the world one idea at a time. That isn't done just through good software. It's also really done through great people doing incredible work and changing the way that organizations think and do innovation. And therefore, thought leadership and best practice and all of that good stuff is critical to that. And as I said, therefore, today we've got Elvin Turner, who's come along to share some of his thoughts. With that, Elvin, I'm going to hand the floor and the mic over to you to wow and inform, and I look forward to hearing what you've got to say and to some good chat afterwards. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thank you, Simon. Right, let's see if we can get this to work. Hopefully, right now the idea is that I mesmerize you for about 30 seconds with this. You and then you do anything I say. Go to Amazon and buy Be Less Zombie. No, I'm joking, of course. So anyway, we've got 20 minutes or so. What I want to do is, I'm not just going to regurgitate the book and do that author thing. What I want to do is almost talk about some of the stuff that's come from the book, but also what's happened since. One of the things that I've learned working with different kinds of organizations while trying to apply some of the tools, the techniques, the tactics in Be Less Zombie, and particularly around the lens of the leaders, because quite often what will happen is I'll work with an organization, the CEO will say, we're stuck, can you come and help us innovate? And I get in there and I start doing some poking around and find quite quickly that there's no shortage of ideas and innovation. There's just a real deep frustration with what's going on inside the organization. People would love to innovate, but they can't. And we have this curious situation going on where the relationship that the leader has with innovation affects everything at a level that perhaps we haven't necessarily appreciated before. At top level it seems instinctive and right, but what can we do about it? Because quite often those same people who are frustrated because they can't innovate are looking up at the boss and saying, if only you knew what it was really like, can you come and help? So this is really some observations around what are the practical things you can do if you're in a context where, I'm going to say, the leaders don't get it in inverted commas, that's too general and that's a little bit unfair. But quite often the feedback I get is, yeah, can you go and tell my boss the stuff we're talking about? Can you put him on this course? Can you get him to read Bill Zombie? Because if he did this stuff, everything will be great. Well, let's see. Let me just share some things with you that I've come across that I hope that you'll find helpful, and then we'll open up to some Q&A. So first of all, this is often the opening gambit of a conversation that I have, and it's just the way the phone rings. Usually it's large organizations trying to do innovation better. And the biggest opening gambit, I think, or the most frequent one I find, is leaders saying there's not necessarily a shortage of innovation, it's the wrong kind of innovation. It's the big ideas that could afford us deeper levels of competitive advantage, that are harder to replicate, and are going to give us a longer run, if you like, a better insurance policy against the future. And actually we're overwhelmed with all of the day-to-day stuff. We need to strike a better balance. The other thing is that I hear quite often is, what is it with these people? I tell them to innovate and then nobody moves. It's like, what else do you need? I'm saying it's okay. I'm saying it's okay to fail. I'm saying it's okay to go off and do this stuff. So why is it that so many leaders, 94%, I'm sure you've come across that survey if you work in innovation, apparently 94% of all CEOs are just really frustrated with their innovation performance inside their organizations. I think, if I had to pick a number, I'd probably close somewhere between 90 and 100% are in the same bracket, depending on quite how you frame the question. But here's what's going on at the other end of the telescope. And this is a paraphrased quote from a conversation yesterday morning when I'm working on a global leadership development program for a law firm at the moment. And here's the reality at 9:54 yesterday morning. This really good guy, I mean, his heart was so in the right place. He said, I really want to help this place move forward. I really want to overcome this issue that my clients are facing. And it's almost as if the organization is deliberately conspiring against me to actually make the progress that we all want to make. Of course, it's not. It's never necessarily deliberate, but the organization is getting in its own way and tripping itself up. So you have this, what I call often creative constipation going on. There's no shortage of ideas. They just can't come out. And there's several reasons. One is, well, if I put my hand up and suggest an idea, I'm going to look stupid. I'm challenging the status quo. I'm potentially putting my career on the line to some extent, because I'm almost saying today isn't working as well as it could, and I'm being a contrarian, which might not be good. Equally, if my boss says, yes, that's a great idea, you should run with that, I've just given myself another evening job, which I haven't got time to do. And then if it fails, I'm committing double suicide. I've just spent, a year or so of my life doing something that I thought was going to help. It didn't, and now I'm being crucified for it. So people understandably are holding ideas in. And even when they do let them out, often we have this creative indigestion. It's the very ideas that the leaders are asking us to bring to the table. When they do make it to the table or to the whiteboard, very quickly, we look around and realize, well, we can't really do this. It's either too risky, or we don't have the processes, we don't have the resources. Let's leave that for next quarter. It's a good idea, but we'll leave it and we'll come back to it. And inevitably it dies a slow death in a cupboard somewhere. So we have this tension going on where you've got constipation and indigestion going on with innovation. And a lovely, I suppose it's a coincidence, I found out when I wrote this. So the title's Be Less Zombie. If you put it into an anagram generator, Blob seizes me is one of the things that comes out, which for me, it perfectly sums up the way that a lot of people feel about innovation. It's, I'm trying to do this thing, but wherever I move, there is this big status quo that just shuts me down and frustrates me. So what are we going to do? Now, in some respects, this isn't anything new. We know all of this, but it's got a worrying side effect that I'm starting to see more and more leaders become anxious about. And that is, I alluded to it just now, that operating model only really has space for incremental innovation. It's squeezing it in around the edges. And often, we probably all recognize that it's when a fire lands on my desk, an unexpected curveball comes in, or something breaks, or something goes wrong, I innovate out of necessity to solve a problem. not necessarily looking proactively to say, how can we make our customers' lives even better or internal processes even better? It's, this broke, how do I fix it? And the innovation is kind of on the wrong foot. You're always on the back foot rather than trying to lean into the future and create value. You're in rescue mode. If you haven't come across this book, I really recommend it. It's called Whiplash, written by a guy called Joey Ito, who used to be the director of the MIT Media Lab, where they do all the crazy stuff, bringing all kinds of innovation lenses together. And it's a real eye-opener for the speed and scope of change that's going on in the world, that most of us have no idea how fast it's really changing and what's really going on, and makes the case for more disruptive, bolder, more transformational innovation even stronger. And if we're not doing this, then we're putting ourselves at risk. And again, another piece of research you may have come across that's come up a fair few times in the last year or so is one of the results of us not being able to keep up with the speed and scope of innovation is that companies are dying faster than ever. Now, I would say this slide is showing, a shorter and shorter lifespan. That doesn't necessarily take into account things like mergers and acquisitions, which is in here, but it does. I think if you look at the underlying thing, what you're seeing is a difficulty for organizations to retain relevance. They're not able to sense and respond with adequate speed and with adequate excellence and quality to maintain the relevance, which is really what this is all about. It's the pursuit of profitable relevance, that for me is what strategy innovation is all about. So bottom line for me on all of this is, when leaders tell me there is this kind of crisis of creativity and bold thinking in their organizations, I don't think it's true. I think what most organizations suffer from is a crisis of context. When we have so many barriers coming up, and this often on leadership development programs or at the beginning of a consulting assignment, I will go in and just do a quick sheep dip and ask questions that help me understand what are the real constraints here. And then if you want a quick and dirty one, it just asks people to complete this sentence: I would innovate more, but fill in the blanks. And these are the usual suspects, and I'm sure for many of us they won't be a surprise. But when you bundle them all together, it really is an issue of context that we have never really wrestled to the ground. We're very focused on what's the portfolio of ideas, what's the great idea process that we need to go through, the stage gate process, great governance, but who's putting the governance in place around the culture and some of the other parts of context that have to show up in order for those ideas to continually show up in the future. So let's unpack this a little bit. So in the book, in Be Less Zombie, I mean, it was a 10-year research program as well as my own work. I kind of wanted to pull together what is it that these great organizations are doing. And behind the scenes, perhaps unsurprisingly, they're doing one thing that nobody else or the others aren't doing, which is they're making a deliberate choice to turn innovation on and turn it up, and they're never going to turn it off. And they know that they don't know all of the answers on how it's going to work, but they decided they're going to learn their way forward, just as we would with a good product iteration program. They're going to look at their context as well and say, what must be true in the areas of process and capabilities and resources and culture and leadership if the innovation performance that we need to show up is actually going to show up. And let's be deliberate about it. Let's align it with strategy so it's hard to dislodge. Let's put the right metrics and measures in place and rewards so that it builds a life of its own and becomes normalized. And there's usually a process behind that as well. And really, it's we just said, it's the alignment of strategy. What won't happen unless we innovate? There's your innovation strategy. What's the context we need for that innovation to show up? Let's figure out what that looks like, work back from the future, what would need to be true, and then let's put some metrics in place to allow that to operate. Now, I started off by saying all of this is one of the large levers of control here on whether this works or works less, is the leader's relationship with relationship. And I guess what I've learned is, unsurprisingly, it's complicated and it depends. And there are three, I'm kind of stereotyping a bit here, but when I think about the leaders that I've worked with and work with today even, they often fall into three categories. And it's kind of tongue-in-cheek. I hope you don't mind. So the first one is we have people who are just flirts. They're flirting with innovation. They're running campaigns now and again. You know, they've got good intention. We're going to do something. It's not like we're in absolute denial and we're absolutely fine. I would say there's probably another one there, which is, I don't know what you call them, but they're not even interested in being in relationship with innovation. But you've got something happening, but it's pop up, disappears. There's no real continuity or deliberate pursuit of it. And often I would also put into this category, you know, if we've got a lab, we're fine. I'm working with an organization at the moment who they're doing some really great stuff in the lab. But when you talk to the rank and file management, the middle management, they say, well, that's great up there, but I've got no time to solve some of the really important challenges in front of my clients' faces right now. And it would be a game changer for them if only I could, you know, fill in the blanks, but there's no deliberate context created for them to do that. So that is flirting. Dating, you know, we're getting a little bit more serious. We're starting to build capability around the organization. And then finally, we've got, you know, committed, which is embedding. This cannot go away. It has to show up as a superpower. We're going to think about it and develop it just as we would any other function, whether it's finance or marketing. We can systematize this. We can embed it, and everybody knows how it works. And you know, and the whole thing flies. One of the things that I discovered, and I wish I'd discovered this sooner, is that one of the things that holds back or constrains a leader's relationship with innovation is their exposure to a great innovation environment. And what I mean by that is very often, you know, leaders and managers are promoted to their level of competence or incompetence, whichever version you want to quote. But usually a leader has done a good job at something to get to where they are. And usually that's delivering something known, predictable cause and effect. I'm very good at this. I understand this, and I can deliver. I can run a team now that does that. I can run a division that does that. And that's great. But what that doesn't give them the opportunity to do is to flex and grow muscles around what it takes to create an environment where bolder, scarier, more ambiguous, uncertain ideas can show up, which is a very different skill set. And Simon, I've heard you talk a lot about the ambidextrous organization, where you've got that skill set in both areas. But very often, and with the best will in the world, very often the leaders that I meet, they've had 2 half-day training sessions on innovation as part of a wider leadership development program in their career, sitting on some bean bags, learning about how to brainstorm and maybe a few other things, which is great. It's a start, but that's not enough to now go back and create a context where the very ideas that you're shouting for are able to emerge because you've deliberately helped create and curate a system that is able to sustainably release the ideas that we need. And you know, as a paraphrase to what many CEOs and execs will say to me is, don't tell me why we need to innovate. Don't tell me what we need to innovate. Just tell me how. The how bit is often the sticking point. And when you can show a leader who is very unlikely to own up to the fact that they've never been on this training because you just can't because of all sorts of reasons. You kind of have to put on this facade that I know how to do this. Most people don't. Let's just get real about it. When you can put in front of a leader a pathway of how innovation can actually lock together and be a journey and be a process and be a function if you want it to be, but it's figure outable in the same way that finance, marketing, sales, all the others are. You can do this. And as soon as you put something in front of a leader to say, and this is how it all fits together, and you measure it like this, and you resource it like this, we just need to be deliberate about it. Suddenly light bulbs go off, in my experience, and the level of desire to want to go further, a little bit further on the first date with innovation, starts to happen. So here's really what I wanted to share. It's on with the idea of the how. How can you use the how of innovation to coach your leaders' relationship with innovation to go a bit deeper, a bit further? So this isn't covert. This isn't overt going and lobbying your CEO or lobbying your manager around how to do this. I'm going to show you 4 things that I've seen work that have helped move the needle with someone's leader, someone's manager, that then starts to create the context in which all of this stuff can happen more successfully. So it's all about the how. Let me just, sorry, I just want to quickly stop something. Okay. So let's move it forward. So ideal world, you do walk up to the CEO and say, listen, we should just be doing this. If we organize the ecosystem in this way, we'd be fine. Now I'm going to deal in reality, because very, very unlikely that's going to work. So there are 4 alternative starting points that I'm going to suggest that are worth considering, depending on your context, depending on what's going on inside your organization. All sorts of things would make each of these show up more relevant than the other. But let's start with this one, which is moving one needle. What do I mean by that? You're in a context where you'd love to be doing more innovation in your team. You know that it's needed, you know it's possible, but you can't for whatever reason. I'd suggest the safest thing you can do, a good starting point, is just to look at everything you need to do right now and say, what's one performance needle that we really need to move and is really going to require some innovation? Just pick one thing. And once you've done that, start to develop some ideas on how you do that. You know, the normal brainstorming approach and idea selection, get to something that you're happy with moving forward. Then do the thing that most organizations don't do, is say, okay, for us, in order to do that, what context will we need in the next 6 to 12 months, or however long the time frame is, in order for that to succeed, in terms of culture, in terms of decision making, in terms of collaboration, in terms of resourcing. Let's get real and define the picture, and then start to make some choices around, okay, so how do we then make that show up? What are we going to do more of, less of? What are we going to start, so that the culture here is more likely to be able to support that journey that we're going to go on in the sphere that you can control? And what you're really doing, I mean, one of my favorite questions of all time is from Rita McGrath, and it's what would need to be true if for. So you pick that, say 12 months time, this is our vision of what the product will be doing, or what the innovation will be doing. What would need to be true in the realms of the key dependencies, and you map that out, you make some agreements around it, and then you go on the journey. You start the activation with the idea, but you're doing 2 things. And again, this is where I often see organizations drop the ball. Maybe everyone on this call does this, but I don't see it very often. You go on your journey of product development or innovation, and probably you're using some form of agile or minimum viable product approach where you're learning your way forward. Do the same with the context, because quite often, even if you do the work of, well, here's the context we think we're going to need, 2 weeks down the line, something changes. That meeting is cancelled, or there's been a reorg over here. So now that thing that we talked about doesn't really work. And you can start to look at it and think, oh, it was a nice idea, but now this context isn't really working. Let's just try and muddle on anyway. And you muddle on, and surprise, surprise, the context isn't there that you need. So go from the start expecting to need to continually iterate and recalibrate the context as you discover that what we thought we would need on this journey turned out only to be 50% true. Let's meet, every month. You're not just looking at the idea journey, you're looking at the context journey, and you're doing sense and respond to get to the point of, now we've got it, now we've nailed it, we're 80-90% there, this is the right working environment, this is working. Now that's what Spotify do. They design it from the start, and they sense and respond their way forward. ING Bank, another great case study to look at. In fact, if you want to connect to them, I know some really good people in there to look at a little bit more. So you go on that journey, you get to the end of the journey, and so now we snap back to the connection with the leader. Go and share over lunch, bring them in for a brown bag lunch or something, and say, listen, we've just been on this really interesting journey. We've decided that we needed to do some innovation. We decided to create the context, starting with time. I don't know whether I mentioned that. The first thing you must do is do innovation in your team around how can we create more time, more of, less of, stop, start, so that we can create time to make this thing happen. Okay, fast forward, we're back, we've got the exec, and we're telling them what we've done. I would be really surprised if the exec, who perhaps hasn't got much experience with innovation, doesn't look at that and go, interesting experiment, could you do that again? And what you're really doing is showing them, you're just starting to open the curtain around, this is a way of working that's repeatable. So that's kind of a quick sort of stab into the world of innovation, where around one project, one needle, you're just trying it out. If you want to then take it deeper, this is where I spend most of my time doing most of my work at the moment, It's not trying to do an organizational innovation strategy in a context where that just isn't up for grabs. That's just not on the table. Start where you can. Always think about, what do I control? What do I influence? What do I have to accept? Control and influence, build an innovation plan strategy around that. So again, think about, where do we need to be in X time frame? Working back from that, what innovation will be necessary in order for us to do that? What's the strategy gap? Okay, what portfolio of ideas are we going to need to deliver that innovation at the level that we can? Now, what's the context that we're going to need to go on that journey for these kind of things to show up? What context are we going to need? Exactly the same conversation, action plan, get going, test and learn, the ideas and the context. You're co-designing culture and context all the way through, just like you would the product. And then you start to normalize as that nail it then scale it book. Once you've nailed the context to a larger, lesser or greater degree, then start to make sure that meetings are always talking about innovation. You've got the metrics, you've got the rewards that hold it in place, because the status quo will do its absolute best to rip that stuff out, drop fires on your desk. So you're just trying to make it as normal as possible. And then bring in a leader and say, I just thought it might be interested to come and see how we're working here. And we just seem to be able to make this innovation thing work. Showing them the how, showing them it's not rocket science. It's almost, I would say, 80% just being deliberate. We're going to figure this out. We're all smart. We just got to choose. Do we want to figure it out or not? And it's going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it when we get to the other side. So that's the second one. So one is perhaps project-based. The next one is, no, we're going to go on a team journey. We're going to make sure that we are the team that is known around here for the ones that innovate. And we're going to go on a journey and we're going to figure out how we make this stuff show up on repeat. Now, if neither of those are possible for you, another way in I've seen is influencing or making suggestions to HR around things they could include in their leadership development programs. One of them can be proposing it has to be an experiential innovation learning module. I've run lots of these, and I think this is a great Trojan horse. So in that process, you teach them the principles of how to lead innovation, but particularly around experimentation. So, start small, dream big, start small. Agile a little bit, but more lean startup, because it's so easy to get your head around and easy to go and implement. Then send them out on 60 to 90-day experiments in teams. So say you've got 20 delegates, 4 in a team, 5 teams go on a journey of trying to develop something using the principles that you've taught them around, particularly around experimentation. And they come back and they present almost, it can be like a Dragon's Den or a Shark Tank type thing. And what you're doing is you're not pitching the ideas, you're coming back with recommendations. So panel, we had this idea, business case, usual stuff, and here's our recommendation on what we think what we should do with it, and also what the organization would need to do in order to be able to work with this kind of idea. I have probably seen that meeting move the mindset of more leaders than anything else, because people who particularly have not encountered things like lean startup before say, you did what? With no money, or with like next to no budget? Oh my goodness, a huge howl light bulb just went off in their head, because what they see is, hang on a minute, now all of the stakes go right down around innovation. That means that lots of people could be taking the first step towards big, bold ideas that they wouldn't otherwise have taken, because the stakes are so low. No one's going to get fired for designing a value proposition test or a minimum viable product just to get to the next level of validation. To the extent where I was doing a program with Sony Music, and it was in New York, and they were doing the playback in New York it was a global program, so the Americans were doing that. And the CEO at the time, he was over 80, I think. He just fought his way to the front and grabbed the mic and he said, oh my goodness, I'm not going to try and do an American accent. He said, this is the stuff I've been waiting for 20 years, finally. And he retired the next year, so he got to see it. But his voice on the mic, the ripple effect across the organization was, he's right, and we better pay attention because he just said that, and now he's going to be looking for it. So it's a little bit kind of Trojan horse in that it just helps people very quickly see in practical terms, in ways that would really change the business. Wow. And all you did was invite leaders to come and see this, their best emerging talent share some ideas. But in the process, they see a little bit of the how. The final thing, this is the last point before I close, none of this may be available to you. The last thing, I mean, there are other options. I'm just picking 4 here, really. The last one that I've seen is less common, but and it requires perhaps a little bit more courage, but has worked in different contexts, which is a letter to the CEO. And it's not really a letter. It's more, I mean, you could think about it as an ebook, a white paper, or something, but it's a recommendation to the CEO. That is, listen, I'm just this guy or gal, I'm down in the organization, I'm looking around and I'm seeing so much potential opportunity for innovation that could move so many needles for us. But there are some things in place that seem to be holding us back. And what I want to do is just share with you my observations about some things that I think could happen that could really move the needle. Now, at first you might think, why on earth would you do this? How many layers of trouble am I going to get into for not following procedure on who I can talk to? Do you know, the CEOs that I work with, they love it when people take the initiative to contact them about something where they're demonstrating care for the organization, care for the outcomes of the organization. Someone is taking their own time to look around and study and come to me with a really well thought through smart synthesis of what they think we should do. Now, they may not do anything with it at one level. It's not always the case. But I suppose from a cynical point of view, if you wanted to get on the radar from the talent perspective, it's no bad thing to do. But often what it does, it's this how journey again. You're helping them to see often things that aren't visible at a C-suite level. We just assume, you know, I've given them permission. Why aren't they moving? Well, what you don't see is the layers of junk and bureaucracy and infighting and just lack of resource that you assume is there. It's not. It helps them get a window on something that they thought was there that really isn't. You know, sharing real life stories, don't have to name names, but this was the opportunity. This was the endeavor. Unfortunately, we know we snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, or the other way around. It's the other way around, isn't it? Recommendations. So here's what I think we could do, and you can root that in, you know, the frameworks that we've talked about already. Some further reading. Few people do it, and I think it's worth doing, because as you write about this stuff, it only deepens your own understanding around how innovation fits together in your own context. But also be prepared to be part of the solution. And I've seen this happen where someone did something like this, and then they were immediately invited to come and take on a role to help orchestrate this. That wasn't necessarily a promotion in one level, but it created a new capacity in the organization to start looking at this deliberately that didn't otherwise exist, which wouldn't have happened if someone hadn't taken the initiative to say, we really must do something here, and nothing's going to change unless the top team does something. I'm going to give it a go. Now, I've also been invited to send my book to a few CEOs because they need to read it, and the phone has never rung, so there's no guarantee that it would work, but it's an option, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the CEO. Look for the person on the board who has the most need for innovation, or the one who kind of gets it the most, and send it to them and get them to talk to the CEO. Be smart about how it needs to go, but it's just another route in to show the how, so people can go, yeah, actually, that doesn't sound too difficult after all. We just need to choose to resource that in that way. Anyway, those are just some thoughts on how to help improve the relationship between execs, leaders, and innovation by showing them some more of the how, so that they don't have to feel embarrassed and own up that they don't know how to do some of this stuff. And actually, they'll be relieved and thankful. Maybe not immediately, but over time, they'll be thinking, once you've seen this stuff, you can't unsee it. And you start to make decisions in different ways and all sorts of things. Anyway, let's stop there. I'll stop sharing. Perhaps Simon and you and I can share some questions that are coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Elvin, for trying to synthesize 10 years of research into 5 slides. And luckily, you can synthesize it into the book, though. So where is it? Where are we? There you go. I do recommend it. First of all, great American accent aside, I wondered how long you were going to push that one for with it. There are a number of questions, and I've got a few myself. Please keep putting more in if anybody has them. And I had seen your acronym before, but I still think it's pretty funny, as your blob seizes me.
Yeah.
One as well. The couple of things that you mentioned. I think one of the challenges maybe in this whole space is that innovation's a bit of a false friend, right? So there's a few questions in here, and I might just kind of pick a couple of threads out of them to start with. You mentioned the concept of the ambidextrous organization, which we at Wazoku really like and really believe quite strongly in, right? There were a number of the businesses on your slide that you looked at who are digital natives, right? And many digital natives are inherently ambidextrous, right? They've not grown up in the age where there was anything but digital. Digital is inherently sort of hypothesis-led, experimental in its nature, very agile in its ways of working. But you did have a few on there that were not, right? You've got Philips and Gore and some other companies that we have the pleasure of working with, and others. What is it that they particularly have done well, in your opinion, versus some of those digital natives where it's perhaps easier to understand why it's a little bit more second nature to them in making innovation a more accessible and more everyday thing for their businesses?
I think for me, it was, I mean, it sounds so obvious, but they've all made the choice. We're going to take the red pill. We're going to do innovation, whether we like it or not, because we've got no choice, because someone somewhere is already trying to figure out what we do and how to do it better. And they will. It's only a matter of time. So might as well be us. Otherwise, and that's why I know this is an example of a born digital organization. Actually, it probably isn't Netflix, because they started with DVDs. If you look at the way that Netflix thinks, they started in DVDs and they looked at streaming and they had a bit of a false start with it, and then they moved to streaming. And you'd be thinking, okay, well, they're a great streaming organization for films. That's not how they think about themselves. They think about themselves as that their mission is, we help people find great films. There's no technology in that statement. There's no product affinity with it. It was DVDs. Now it's streaming. You can bet your bottom dollar that, of course, they're going to maximize and optimize streaming. They're probably already looking for the next thing. Or what does film even mean? How can narrative start to show up in different ways in parts of our lives that we'd still be, willing to pay for, even though it shows up in very different formats? So innovation is much more, it's the whole jobs to be done metaphor. It's progress thinking. What progress do our customers want to make in a particular context, and how can we always be the organization that is helping them make most progress regardless of the technology? And that's not ambivalence for the technology, because they are serious about it, but they hold it closely and lightly at the same time. They're ready to let go. They're ready to burn it down, because they know there will be a better way to do it at some point. So regardless of sector, you say Philips and Gore, they're all about hardware, mostly physical product. It's the same attitude as what's at the heart of Netflix, is always better, ever better, regardless of format, regardless of technology. Let's pursue what our customers want us to pursue.
Do you think there's a capability piece in there as well that comes from a different type of talents that are coming into their businesses? I hate asking this question, by the way, because you'll see me say many times, I believe we're all innately creative.
Yeah.
But there is a different, and maybe it's culture, right? There's a different setup in those businesses that makes it possible versus others, right? What do you think? There is something. Is there a je ne sais quoi in there moment, or is it lots of little things that make that difference?
Well, I mean, this idea of the ambidextrous organization and then transferring that down to people, I think a lot of the things, again, if you read the data on who are these top innovators hiring, I don't want to keep picking on Netflix. They've got their own way of doing that. They're always looking for the best of the best, and they pay whatever it takes to get that person, because they know they'll deliver 10 times productivity or whatever it is. I think at least what I observe is that people or organizations are looking for this ambidextrous culture where they're able to deliver today and design tomorrow at the same time. They don't have a problem or a difficulty with that, but they're really good at delivering results. And that's often the thing that they're really after. But I think zooming out from that, the more interesting conversations I'm seeing around talent at the moment are, well, why do they need to be employees? Why don't we create a swarm around an idea and think, well, who are the best qualified people on the planet to help advance this project? And we'll do what the James Bond films do. They've got 4 people at the heart of the production company, and they swarm out to, I don't know, several hundred to build the movie, and then they're back down to 4 again. Who are the best people on the planet to make a James Bond movie? Let's go and find them. Well, let's now take that approach and not assume they all need to work for us. You know, IP is becoming a little bit more transient in some areas than others. There's lots of edges that are bleeding together. And I think in the pursuit of agility and excellence, certainly some of the execs I'm talking to are much more open to pop-up talent. You've still got some core that are running the organization, but if we're looking for truly different thinking, and you know, lots of the big ideas come at the intersection of sciences and disciplines that we don't even have in our organization anyway. So are we even being good stewards of today and tomorrow if we're only looking at who's within these 4 walls? I'd say probably not. So I'm starting to see more, not everywhere, but in some organizations, a much more fluid approach to how do we think about talent more strategically.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice plug for our open innovation work as well, right? Which is exactly that story. And we talk a lot about, you know, even NASA and its 17,000 rocket scientists lean a lot on open innovation and accessing the rest of the world that aren't those 17,000 people to make sure that it's harvesting all of the best ideas in solving some of the world's, you know, toughest problems, or sometimes just a little bit that they can't quite get right themselves or can't get round to. That's the other piece of it. Building on that question I asked earlier, there was a question in here on, you know, is your analysis and findings the same for organizations' relationship with R&D? This again comes back to this classification piece, right? Like, what is innovation? Is how does it fit with R&D? There's a slightly different question here around transformation as well. Like, how do you view all of that? Obviously, we've touched a bit on ambidexterity, but what are your thoughts?
I think just picking up on the transformation piece, I think there's so much overlap with innovation. Personally, I try not to get too hung up with it, which is a luxury that I know not everybody has, because you have job roles and functions where they're baked into the job title and it's separate. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is this balance of delivery and discovery. And I think probably what I see most successful transformational programs doing is using the principles of innovation. It's like that dance between innovation and entrepreneurship. You know, innovation is a tool of entrepreneurship. I'd probably say that innovation is also a tool of transformation. So all the tools of innovation help support that. So I'm not sure, for me personally, certainly with the work that I'm involved with and the clients that I work with, it matters that much. R&D, I'm just going to be really honest here. I haven't worked in many contexts where this is particularly shown up as an issue. R&D is out there doing its own thing. And perhaps I've had the benefit of working inside organizations where it's a very well joined up function. They are very strategically aligned, and the money that they're spending, that they're pursuing, is actually informing the projects that the strategy is asking them to do anyway. And I know that's not always the case. There's often a disconnect between the two. So I don't know if I'm going to bid off anything very helpful there.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we see, and I think that it's this toolkit of innovation again, right? Like, I think there are certainly things that can be brought to the R&D function, I think, around openness, co-creation, collaboration, where certainly for those businesses that have typically hired the best people, the best scientists, the best whatever it might be, who have spent years honing their craft as a PhD or whatever, and think, if I can't solve it, I'm failing, that are very similar to some of the examples you gave up front. And that actually the tools of innovation, the tools of open innovation, can help to augment that and speed up the process, lower the cost, and increase the success rate in R&D as much as it can in any other part of the business, right? And the other example you gave earlier on labs, I think, is is great, right? And it's a sort of love-hate piece for me, because there's so much theatre, but also so much opportunity lost by thinking that's all that you need to be doing, or that that's your innovation. Because as you said, there are so many other bits of the business that just desperately need those tools and that ability to get on and do it. And I think that does come back to this capability piece, right? How can we help people build the confidence that they have the tools and that they can do these things, right? Because if you can raise the low watermark and also raise the high watermark, and we spoke a lot about leaders in this bit, right? Of how we get leaders more comfortable with it. But equally, we've got, an army of people in the organization who may have the permission. And I think there was a capability and a know-how piece there as well. Do you see anyone doing that raising the low watermark piece well, as an organizational capability?
Have I seen it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think where I've seen it best is in the leadership program space, where you give people just enough to go and show that this thing works. They surprise themselves because they've made more progress than they think they would. They love the journey because they've got a new toolkit that they can play with. Often one of the offshoots of that I've seen is people designing minimum viable products. And they're saying, hang on a minute, this minimum viable phrase is really interesting. Let's get rid of product. What's a minimum viable meeting? Because if I can do minimum viable meetings, suddenly I can create a load more time. So let's run some experiments around meetings. Instead of an hour, let's see what happens if we run all meetings at 50. Any difference in quality? Better, worse, the same? Anything that's better or the same? Let's try 30. People have run experiments around that minimum viable process. So I've started talking about minimum viable X as a thing, just as a lens that I've just seen lots of different conversations, lots of different ideas showing up just because of that phrase, and people are taking it and running with it on their own and using the principle. And I can just see there's another question that's popped up, if you don't mind me just grabbing that one now, about working in government. Do the principles in the book work for government? And I'd say thank you for asking the question, because for me, all of these, and I'll be really honest, we're all friends here. I get a little bit cross when people, if I run a leadership program or any sort of program, and I share examples from all kinds of different industries, and people say, yeah, but it's not like that for us. Everybody says that. And at the heart of it is what I'm saying here, and I think probably Simon, you'd agree, there are principles that you have to do an interpretation job on in your own context. And I've done work in government in really painful situations where there is no apparent flexibility to do anything different. And when people have taken some of these tools and just tried to move something 1%, because that's all the culture can tolerate, with the ambition of moving it another 1%, in a month's time or something, that's frustrating for many people, but it's the reality. But over time, it's this kind of reverse Chinese water torture. You're going to get there in the end. And I've seen things turn around over a longer period of time. But the encouragement I want to put out there is there's so much going on in innovation in government now. I would encourage you to Google lean experimentation in government and just see what comes up. Different case studies from around the world. There is tons of really good stuff going on. Maybe not in your context and culture that you've seen, but around the world, there are now things popping up in all kinds of settings where you can take 80% of what they've done and bring it into your world and change it. And I would just counsel everybody, and read any innovation book, and I defy you to say that works perfectly for our context. There has to be an interpretation job to make it fit for purpose, because your culture is like no other culture, like any other organization. You've just got different human beings trying to do different kinds of work. So take the principle and say, okay, so how would this show up for us? Or we need to dial that back 50% because the level of tolerance for risk here isn't that high for lots of reasons. One other thought, sorry, just jump in on this, is not only in government, but also often in science and legal spaces, often innovation seems impossible. And I found that lawyers can be your friend here, because often they're seen as the people who are the naysayer. You can't do that. No, you can't do that. And you've got this great idea and there are 10 reasons why you can't do it. If you invite those people in the early stages and say, look, this is the outcome that we can see that customers want. Here is the thing that we're looking at, the vehicle that we think could do it. Come and help us co-design within the frameworks of the law what is possible. And the reason I say that is I've come across a few examples where the team has said, oh my goodness, we could do this. And someone will say, oh, no, I can't do that because the legal guys will shut it down. Then the legal guy says, no, 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 no. You didn't know that there's actually a loophole in this particular part of the law which would allow you to do that under these circumstances. They're like, oh my goodness, suddenly the lawyer is a hero. But it's about, you know, who are the perceived constrainers are often the ones who, in that context where it feels like nothing can move, the subject matter experts are often the ones that can help you see things that you couldn't otherwise see because you've got perceived constraints there that aren't really there, or they're there at less of a level that perhaps you think they are.
Yeah, and I think I agree with a lot of those examples and points, right? And I think often that there are parts of the organization that can often feel like they might be the last place you'd want to go to, that sometimes should be the first place that you should want to go to as well, right? From an organizational point of view, procurement, legal, others, right? Like I found to be involve them in the innovation conversation earlier, and actually they can be really good champions and supporters for you. I think interestingly, government beats itself up a bit too much, in my opinion, as well. I think it's one of our top sectors that we work in around the world. They do some phenomenal innovation at a very grassroots level and at a kind of globally impactful level in all kinds of different scenarios with all the restrictions. And I think a part of it is a bit of culture bashing that happens that isn't deserved or warranted, actually. And it sort of falls into the question that came in first that I've not asked yet, which is about this idea of building trust and how can we build trust to encourage participation. You touched on it a little bit at the start, and I think storytelling is a key bit of it. But as you said earlier, you tell stories and all you ever get is, well, that's great for that context, but it's not my context, right? Even if it's the same business, it's not my context sometimes. So how do we build that trust in a meaningful and sort of with longevity, I guess, and to drive participation?
I think at the top level, it has to start at the board and values and then really being lived and all of that good stuff. And that's great, but often, probably the people on this call, you might not have that luxury. And I always say the things that you want to do corporately, look at what you can control in your context. And if you have some ability to influence the levers of trust in your area of the organization, I would say you should make that an absolute priority, because everything rises when trust increases. There's so much research out there now showing decision-making speed, efficiency, collaboration. It all goes up when trust increases. And I like to talk about trust kind of in two dimensions. So there's capability. I trust you to be able to do this. And there's character. I trust that you're going to do this in the right way with the right motives. And often we don't talk about that very openly. And I've got stuff that I run in teams to help them do a trust audit, to see, you don't have to declare it or share it with one another necessarily to begin with, but you're just helping yourself think, well, to what extent do I trust these people? And remember, trust shifts according to context. If we're in our day-to-day jobs and we're just doing the status quo, we probably have a fairly high level of trust for one another because we're all doing our jobs, we're getting it done to a greater or lesser extent. When something shifts or something's dropped in our laps that we've never done before, suddenly we're looking at each other through different lenses. Well, none of us have ever done this before, so how do I not know that you're not going to drop this and you're not going to drop that? And so it starts to move a bit. Interestingly, when I ask this question in teams, that very many teams say, well, we don't have a problem with trust. It's not us, it's them. You can't throw that team as far as, trust that team as far as you can throw them. They're the real problem. So it's more sophisticated than just building trust in a team. It does require an organizational approach. But I think the thing I would say is, in your team, in your context, and there's been tons written about this, so many resources out there that you can get your hands on, is say, okay, we're going to go on a trust journey because we know that the higher the trust, the more likely it is we're going to do our best work. And in the context of innovation, we'll probably push the needle a little bit further. So, team, what would it take for us to be a team that needs, that in 12 months' time, we could look back and say, we've moved the needle on trust by X%, and facilitate a safe conversation where you can actually find some practical things around the way that we communicate, the way that we share information. Silly things sometimes damage trust when they don't need to. but you get the team to co-design that trust journey and then own the journey themselves. That's been the fastest way that I've seen teams do it. The other thing is, this is why team building, I guess, is such a good thing. There's nothing like a good crisis to bring out the best and the worst in people and use that as a case study to say, okay, under those circumstances, what happened? How can we think differently about that and go on a journey? And they'll probably need some coaching in there. You probably need some work around emotional intelligence on how we work with one another. But it's funny, about 2 or 3 years ago, I decided that there were 2 topics that I wanted to focus on more than anything else, because I was seeing them as the real potential game changers. One is true creativity applied inside organizations, not paying lip service to it. And the second was trust. Because if you build trust, so much more snaps into place. And of course, above all of those is idea management platforms. But I'm coming down a level.
Just on that point though, as a non-intended segue in, and I appreciate that the reverse drop in of what we do there is, so innovation is. I spent about an hour on Tuesday afternoon doing a team building activity with some of my team where we went blind driving, right? We put a blindfold on and we had to work and we had to work as a team in all kinds of crazy ways to get around an obstacle course, with one of us having at any point in time with a blindfold on. And I feel like at a board and C-level in many organizations, that analogy is kind of how innovation is, right? Like we know we've got to do it. I mean, it's probably happening in bits of our businesses. You know, the examples you gave earlier are probably happening in all of the businesses right now that people they might be doing it themselves, or someone else might be doing it. And that's good and bad in some ways, right? Because you can end up with little pockets of things that don't necessarily ever find the light of day, and therefore they were good in the moment, but not necessarily good at the time. What at a leadership level is going to change that means that actually there are metrics that are being asked for, or there are data points that are being sought that are actually part of that conversation on a regular basis, right? Not just, oh, we had this amazing moonshot moment and something happened, or this thing just blew up and holy crap, right? Like, what is it? Because we have it in so many other bits of the business that are, quite frankly, probably not as important as this in many ways, especially if you take that expansive view of innovation around ambidexterity. Like, it's a big question, right? But what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think the things that I've seen get most attention are, well, let's look at where we think we need to be in 3 to 5 years' time. And now let's look at the half-life of our relevance. What gives us the confidence that we think we're going to show up in that state in 3 to 5 years' time, when we look at some of the things that are coming towards us, the weak signals from the future, and to what extent do we have a handle on those? And my sense at the moment is that we talked about that book earlier, Whiplash. There's so much out there about how different the world is going to be in the not too distant future. I don't feel most execs have a real grip on what, you know, the fourth industrial revolution technologies are actually capable of doing. So you look at AI plus, I don't know, AR plus drones, or whatever combination you want to put together, and say, what does that mean in our context for the progress that our customers are going to make? What would be possible? And therefore, where are the threats and where are the opportunities? So that half-life of relevance that we have that always wears out, I don't think most companies are thinking clearly enough about what's the true impact of that stuff coming this way. And we're still operating at that buzzword level around technology, rather than the real creative and intellectual pursuit of what does that actually mean for us? What difference will it make? I mean, so many people at sort of middle levels of organization who are real experts in this stuff, but they can't get a good innovation conversation on the table because the leaders really don't understand what the technology is about. They're assuming that someone else is taking care of it, or are happy with themselves that they can just throw the sound bites out there. So when you talk about the metrics, the speed of relevance, the speed of the decline of relevance relative to what's coming our way, and then looking the other way out and saying, you know, I love the way that 3M thinks about metrics, is 30% of revenues need to come every year from products that didn't exist 4 years ago. That puts a demand on renewal and relevance continually showing up. So things like that are things that I'm seeing have got most teeth at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's a great example, right? It's obviously slightly more different in the government context and other things, but unfortunately, because time flies when you're having fun, time has flown and the fun must end. So I just want to say thank you, Elvin. Thanks for the time it takes to prepare these things. Thanks for the great insights. Thank you to everyone else for giving us an hour of your time to learn. We have a webinar coming up, which we will be taking everyone through the integration that we've just done with MS Teams, which is helping to increase our reach and the access of the innovation work that we do out into organizations that have embraced that collaboration technology. So keep your eyes open for that. And there is the link on screen for anyone that's interested. We've got several copies of Elvin's book, which we will be starting to send out to certain people. If anyone else is interested, you can find it on Amazon or reach out to us, and we'll try our best to share some copies out. Thank you again, everybody. Thanks in particular, Elvin. Much appreciated. And I look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.